Hello, welcome to the Grow Your Wealthy Mindset podcast, where it is all about helping amazing physicians just like you create a wealthy life free from burnout and with the financial security to practice medicine on your own terms. I'm your host, Dr. Elisa Zhang. Hello, and welcome back to the Grow Your Wealthy Mindset podcast. Today's episode is about knowing how much to save for retirement. If you've been listening to this podcast, you know I'd like to talk a lot more about financial freedom than retirement, because certainly you can achieve financial freedom or financial independence and still continue to work if you want to. That being said, there's going to be a point in time where you'll no longer want to work anymore. So in this episode, we're really going to talk about saving for retirement with the idea that you're saving for the ability to no longer work. And you need to actually create a portfolio that will fund your living expenses because you're no longer working. How do you know how much to save for retirement? If you read various books or blogs or listen to different podcasts, you've likely heard anywhere between 10% and even up to 50% of your income if you're reading about obtaining FIRE as soon as possible. My recommendation has generally been to save at least 20% of your gross income for financial freedom, or in this case, we're talking about retirement. In this episode, we're going to deep dive on how much you need to save in order for you to no longer work your day job for income. The percentage to save is really based on how many more years you have until you reach the time point that you want to make work optional. The traditional age people talk about for retirement is age 65. That is when Americans become eligible for Medicare. Unfortunately, health insurance is often tied to employment in the United States. Medicare was created in 1965 to provide health insurance to elderly Americans who are unable to afford or obtain private healthcare insurance. Healthcare costs for the elderly are higher than for younger adults, which adds to the difficulty for the elderly to obtain private healthcare insurance. But of course, age 65 is a somewhat arbitrary age. When I was an undergraduate, I had a summer research position working for a physician who still ran a research lab at the age of 92. Rumor had it that he wasn't going to rest until he won a Nobel Prize in medicine. I never heard him say that, so I don't know if it's really true, but he came to the lab every weekday, Monday through Friday, the entire summer I was there. I decided when I was in medical school, or really the grad part of my MD PhD program, that I wanted to retire by age 55. Honestly, I don't know why I decided on that age. I look back to my written goals, and I have goals dated September 3rd, 2005, that by my 55th birthday, I will have enough investment and or passive income to support my current living expenses, at which point I will be financially free. Perhaps 10 years earlier than normal seemed like a good goal. That was at the time where I was reading books like Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Nowadays, there are so many different ways to think about what we call retirement. People can say they retired from one career and start a new one, either due to financial necessity, but it could also be due to an interest or a passion. You can also semi-retire by cutting back significantly on how much you work. You can achieve financial independence and continue to work, but change the parameters of how, when, or where you work to suit your desires and what keeps you fulfilled in the work you do. That is where I would like all of us to be, working not out of financial necessity, but because it fulfills us. There will be a time that comes where you will no longer want to work. My father, who is a professor, used to say that he would teach until he died and that there was really no reason to retire. That being said, he did semi-retire 2 years ago in his mid-70s, and he now teaches 1 semester a year instead of 2. Let's start talking actual numbers and get into the calculations of how much of your gross income you need to dedicate towards financial freedom and how many years it will take for you to reach that goal. Of course, incomes can fluctuate over time. Most doctors will see increases in income during their early years of practice as they become more efficient at seeing patients or doing procedures or surgeries or whatever they do to bring in their compensation. Unfortunately, by mid-career, income tends to plateau for most employed physicians. The conversion factor for what Medicare pays for RVUs has actually been decreasing, so the average physician makes less now than they did 25 years ago when you account for inflation. For the purpose of these calculations, I'm going to assume a static income I'll use $350,000, which is about the median income across all physicians currently. In the first scenario, I'm going to say that you're single and you make $350,000 a year, which puts you in the 35% tax bracket. For single income filers, the 35% tax bracket spans $243,726 to $609,350. In this scenario, you max out your traditional 401k or 403b plan, contributing $23,500, so that your taxable income is actually $326,500. With this income, your federal income tax plus your FICA taxes, according to smartasset.com, would be $96,417. To simplify things, I'm going to assume you live in a state with no income tax. But of course, many of us do live in states where we do pay income taxes. If you save a total 10% of your income, or $35,000 a year, including what you contribute into your pre-tax 401k or 403b plan, and then you spend the rest of your income of approximately $218,000, then you would need a portfolio of $7.2 million of stocks and bonds to support your spending using the 4% withdrawal rate. It would take you 39.2 years for your portfolio to grow to this size, assuming an overall tax rate of 24% on your income in retirement, and assuming an annualized 7% real return on your investments. That 24% tax rate represents a blended tax rate, not your tax bracket or your marginal tax rate. And this was made based on the 2024 federal tax rates. I also subtracted out FICA taxes because you would no longer pay that in retirement. And these calculations do not include Social Security income as well. To get that 24% blended tax rate, I did some back calculations. So just trust me on that one. And of course, federal income taxes can very well change between now and when you retire. Your tax rate may also be different because of paying capital gains tax rate instead of earned income tax. And depending on where you're living, you may be paying some state taxes or local taxes as well. I know this isn't a perfect model, but it is to show that with a 10% savings rate, it would take you 40 years to have enough saved to be able to retire. And I would think most physicians want to retire in less than 40 years. If your savings rate went up to 15%, which means spending around $201,000 a year if you're spending the rest of your money, then your new portfolio would need to be $6.6 million, and it would take 32 years to grow to this size. Upping your savings rate to 20% of your gross income, or $70,000 a year, allows you to now retire in 28 years. At 25% savings, you can get to your goal in 24.1 years. If you can save more and get to 30% of your gross income, it would take 20.8 years to reach a portfolio of $4.9 million. That would give you an annual spend of close to $150,000 a year. So just from these calculations, you can see why putting 20% towards retirement so that you can retire in less than 30 years is generally a good rule of thumb. Now let's change the scenario that instead of being single, you're a married couple with a combined income of $350,000. Now, instead of being in the 35% tax bracket or marginal tax rate, you're in the 24% tax bracket. In addition, now both of you can max out retirement account contributions in traditional retirement accounts, and that would also decrease taxable income. Though at a 24% tax bracket, you may want to opt for a Roth contribution if your employer allows you to do so. With these calculations, I'm assuming that you're contributing to a traditional 403b or 401k and that you're maxing out at $23,500 in contributions each person each year. After paying federal taxes, FICA taxes, and contributing to those retirement accounts, the annual take-home income ends up being $234,776. By maxing out those retirement accounts for two people under the age of 50, the $47,000 contributed to the two retirement accounts already puts you at a 13% savings rate. Using the same assumptions as before, it would take 35.2 years for the portfolio to grow to $7.2 million, which would yield $288,000 of income or $236,000 of spending after paying taxes. This is assuming an 18% blended tax rate during retirement. With a 20% savings rate, it would take the couple 27 years for their portfolio to grow to $5.6 million so that they could spend around $184,000 a year after taxes. If the couple could manage a 30% savings rate, then it would take 19.9 years to reach a portfolio of $4.5 million that would produce an annual spend of around $149,000 after paying a blended 18% tax rate. If you want to be able to have a portfolio large enough to stop working in less than 30 years from the time you start contributing and investing for retirement, then you really want to be investing 20% of your gross income. The sooner you want to make work optional, the larger your savings rate needs to be. Again, I'm making a lot of assumptions with these calculations. I'm assuming tax rates don't change, income doesn't change, and no state or local income taxes. Tax rates will likely eventually be higher. They almost need to be increased because of our growing national deficit. You're also likely to pay state taxes, though you could choose to move to a state that doesn't have state taxes during your retirement. Your income may increase over time, but may also lag compared to inflation, which actually means getting paid less over time. Many physicians live in places where they do pay state and possibly city taxes. I'm also assuming a 7% real rate of return every year on your investments. By real rate of return, I mean the return adjusted for inflation. That would be the equivalent of a 10% return in a 3% inflation environment. Of course, no portfolio has the same return year after year. Some years the returns can be very high, and other years the portfolio can drop in value. The sequence of returns that happens during the first few years of retirement can make or break your portfolio. If your portfolio does very well for the first 5 years of your retirement, you can likely rest assured that your retirement will be well funded. If the market tanks a few months or a year after you retire, depending on the drop and the recovery time, you may be in for a bumpy ride. The volatility of the stock market will also affect your retirement portfolio as you're building up that portfolio. I also made the assumption that you're spending everything that you aren't contributing towards retirement. Of course, there are some expenses you will no longer have once you're retired. Life insurance and disability insurance are on that list. If you've been saving for higher education for your children, that's expense that you'll no longer have once they're graduated. You may also pay off all your debts, like the mortgage on your house, before you stop working, so you no longer have those payments. Your spending may decrease in retirement, but it's unlikely to decrease more than 50%. In fact, often spending will increase in the first few years after retirement as people enjoy their newfound time with doing activities that cost money, like travel. So yes, these are rough calculations. But in doing these calculations, it does paint a relatively good picture of how much you do need to save. If we turn to the financial literature, Wade Donald Pfau, which I'm totally butchering his last name, but it's spelled Pfau, published an article entitled Safe Savings Rates, a New Approach to Retirement Planning Over the Life Cycle in 2011. He argues that instead of focusing on the safe withdrawal rate, which is done a lot in the financial literature, that we should really be thinking more on a safe savings rate when it comes to retirement planning. I tend to agree. The amount you save and invest for financial freedom is something that each individual can control and generally matters more than your return on investment over the long run when you're investing over decades. In his paper, he reports the minimal savings rate as a percentage of income needed to replace either 50% or 70% of one's final salary in order to maintain a retirement of 20, 30, or 40 years, depending on working and saving over 20, 30, or 40 years, and with investing in 3 different asset allocations: 40% stocks and 60% bonds, 60% stocks and 40% bonds, or 80% stocks and 20% bonds. I know that was quite a mouthful and probably a little confusing to listen to. The show notes has the link where you can download the article online for free. Let me give some example figures, so hopefully that'll create some more clarity. Let's say you want to replace 70% of your final salary and you feel comfortable with a 60% stock and 40% bond portfolio during your retirement. If you're willing to work for 40 years before retiring, you would only need to save 10.6% of your income in order to fund that 20-year retirement, or 12.27% to fund a 30-year retirement, and 12.91% to fund a 40-year retirement. This shows that with a long time span of saving and investing, a relatively low savings rate is needed, which is why contributing to retirement sooner is better. Given the long education training it takes to become a physician, few physicians probably want to plan to work for 40 years. If we look at working for 30 years, then replacing 70% of our final salary would require a range of 17.99% to 31.06%, depending on the length of retirement and the asset allocation. If you can make do with 50% of your final salary, then the savings rate decreases to 12.85% to 22.19%. Again, this falls in line with saving and investing around 20% of income for retirement. What if you're not able to save 20% of your income currently? This is when you really want to take a good look at your personal numbers. If your income is on the lower side, then increasing your income is likely better to pursue than decreasing expenses. There's only so much you can cut your expenses. It's easier to save 25% of $300,000 than 15% of $100,000. Even though at $300,000 you'll be paying higher taxes. Save any raises or bonuses you receive, and avoid increasing your lifestyle as you earn more. Try to work at keeping your fixed costs low. Fixed costs are those costs that you can't change, like your mortgage payment or your car payment. You really want to avoid being house poor or car poor. Start tracking your spending. That's not the same as budgeting, though budgeting may also help. With tracking your spending, you really want to watch how and where you spend money, because this can really reveal a lot about where your money goes. You may find yourself spending for convenience due to lack of planning, where some prior effort could make a big difference. This is often true when it comes to packing food. Bringing your lunch can help you have a healthy and less expensive meal than getting food delivery from Jimmy John's. If you could use some help increasing your savings rate and looking deeper into your spending habits, consider getting money coaching with me. You can sign up for a free consultation where we can talk more about how I can help you reach your financial goals at www.growyourwealthymindset.com. Thank you so much for being a listener of the Grow Your Wealthy Mindset podcast. I know today's version may be a harder one to listen to and possibly easier one to read. I've created a blog version of this episode at my website, www.growyourwealthymindset.com. It's been a goal of mine for a while to create more blog episodes based on these podcast episodes, but you know how life goes. There's only so much you can fit in. Have a great week. If you enjoyed this episode, I would love it if you could share it with your friends and colleagues. And now for the disclaimer. I am not a certified financial planner, accountant, or attorney, and nothing I say should be construed as professional investment, tax, or legal advice. This show is primarily for your education and entertainment. I am a physician, but I'm probably not your physician. So if you need any medical advice, please contact your own physician. Thank you.